I made it. Hello, everyone. Happy Sunday. Welcome whenever you find this. So, today we're going to get back into The Mythical Origin of the Egyptian Temple by E.A.E. Reymond. And we're going into part 4 today, The Creation of the Temple. And chapter 13 is entitled Reconstruction of the Theory Concerning the Origin of the Temple of the Falcon. All right, let's dig in. Let me tuck my foot up in here real. Yeah, I'm gonna get a new computer chair because sitting like this is sort of changing the anatomy of my left leg. I don't know what's up with that. Okay. So here we go. A comprehensive account is given of the manner in which the site of the falcon's first enclosure in the original Payland was believed to have come into existence. It looks as though, at the moment when this enclosure was erected and was occupied by the gods, a definite time of evolution came to an end. The site with the most elementary type of enclosure seems to have become the scene of a new phase of creation, which was regarded as a new and important period in the reign of Tannin. The traditions connected with the last created piece of earth seem to be the factors that determine the characteristics of the forthcoming phase of creation. We think that it is of interest to summarize the ideas that lie behind the creation completed on the land of the home of the Ka. An important feature in this narrative is the Didi pillar. We can follow this in a direct line from the very moment when the creators reached the desert island and when the first sacred domain was recreated as far as the foundation of the first enclosure in the BW place of the Payland. The Didi pillar is never described as a physically real object on the site. Only the memory of it seems to have remained in the knowledge of the creator. This is, in particular, demonstrated by the episode of adoration which the Shebtu were believed to perform on the edges of the Payland of Jeba. They are said to have recalled the substances, or SH squiggly IHT, on the former site of the Didi pillar. From this rite developed a new phase of creation which resulted in the origin of the temple. The Didi pillar, therefore, as an unreal symbol, seems to have had the function of determining land of a specially created nature. This seems to indicate that the Egyptians believed that there were the Didi, or rather, this seems to indicate that the Egyptians believed that where the Didi pillar was, there the sacred nature of the earth was eternally vital, but needed to be revivified by the creation of a new entity closely resembling in its physical appearance that which had once existed there. Genevieve, I hope you had a wonderful week. It's good to see you. Welcome in. You and Lily. The site on which the restoration was to be effected was conceived as deriving from the orders of creation of the earth. It was the direct, though ultimate, outcome of the long drawn out drama of the creation of the earth. Only a land of this nature was believed to be capable of assuming the function of a foundation in the forthcoming phases of creation, which were manifested in the origin of a new sacred unit, the temple. The divine powers who were believed to have acted in this phase of creation were the deities who took part in the former process. They were the progeny of the earth god. The Edfu texts the Edfu text seem to intimate the view that as soon as the process of the creation of the earth came to an end, then followed what is described as NHP, to fashion. Again, therefore, an act of creation, only performed on an entirely different scale and under other circumstances. The action to fashion seems to replace the former process, which was of a magical and symbolical nature, and was believed to have been performed for the first time on the land which was the gift of the deceased earth god. It has been noticed how parallel the beginnings of the falcon's enclosure are to those of the other and earlier divine beings. The setting up of the perch on the marginal land of the Payland is equivalent to the setting up of the resting place in the original domain of the Wetchesset in the island of Trampling. The first enclosure could thus be laid out on land which resembled in its nature the piece of earth on which the creation started, and on which, too, the first resting place of the god erected in the beginning of the world. This belief is parallel to another tradition. In intimating, or no, rather, in imitating, this time, in imitating the physical appearance of the first sacred domain that ever came into existence in the island as the resurrection of the vanished realm of the Pian god, the first enclosure of the falcon in the Payland restores the home of the Ka. Imitating. Is that what it said before? Did I screw that up before? Intimate. Imitate. I'm trying to find it up here. Ah, I'll check it out later. It's not jumping out at me here. Okay. However, neither the earliest enclosure of the falcon nor the private residence of the Ka must be imagined as resembling in detail the developed AUT-NTR, or the mansion of the god. They were undoubtedly much simpler and more elementary structures, but it was from them that eventually the temples of historical times evolved. Mr. Hugh, Paradox Fossils, welcome everyone. I hope you had a wonderful week. Yeah, Monday's tomorrow. It's good. While discussing the situation in the Payland, we indicated the probable physical appearance of the first sacred that was believed to have been founded in an open field and in a muddy area. With a view to sketching the phases of development of the Falcon's primeval domains, it is only necessary to return to the marginal land of the Payland of the Falcon. As has been said, the text is very brief and enigmatic. Nevertheless, our sources contain a number of facts which make it reasonably possible to reconstruct all the phases of evolution from the humblest type of place of in an open field to the final stage of the HWT-NTR, the mansion of the god. I did. I said hi. I said hi to you guys. Okay. The primitive enclosure enshrining the perch of the falcon that was erected on the water's edges seems to illustrate an early stage of evolution. We have mentioned above that the creation of sacred places, which the creators of the earth were believed to have completed, has every appearance of being based on real facts. All the sacred domains which are described in our story, starting with the most primitive resting place of the god in the island, not only reflect and reproduce the original sacred places of the Egyptian gods, but also indicate the manner in which these places were founded. Hence, the place which was believed to have been fashioned for the falcon on the land of the house, the home of the Ka, is only an additional element in this series. The description only conceals another manner of creating a sacred place, as it might have been done in the dim past of pre-dynastic Egypt. The fact that in the Payland the perch was erected before there is any trace of the site of the enclosure proves that the same type of resting place has symbolized the resurrection of the sacred domain of gods within the original island. The revivification home of the Ka marks the starting point in the creation of the new type of sacred abode, the temple. The delimitation of the foundation ground was clearly regarded as being the second episode in the construction of primitive sacred domains according to the beliefs and customs of a remote date. In default of any precise textual or archaeological evidence. Let's start again. All right. In default of any precise textual or archaeological evidence, we have to return to the myth. The site of the enclosure may perhaps have been delimited by the Shebtu themselves, who may be imagined as walking in procession along the boundary of the former home of the Ka, thus indicating where the reed fence should be erected. It looks as though, in the early stages of history, the planning of the foundation ground was regarded as a secret act, since it is projected into a mythical plane and is interpreted as a rite of magical order, or a rite of a magical order, as a rite of a magical order. The narrative is concerned with the description of the ceremonies which followed the delimitation of ground, and which have every appearance of being rites performed with a view to establishing the magical protection of the sacred place to be. Of these, the rite of fumigating seems to be the most important. It is clear that at this stage of the history of the Falcon's domains, the spear does not seem to play any special part. At the end of this episode, a procession seems to have been performed. We imagine that all the deities present in situ were believed to have walked in procession around the ground of the enclosure. This may indicate that in the early stage, after the ground was delimited, statues or images of the deities for whom the enclosure was to be erected were carried in procession around the ground before the construction began. The order of ceremonies may well preserve a memory of the earliest rites of foundation. In this connection, no allusion is made to any of the usual episodes of a foundation ritual, in particular to the performance of the stretching of the cord and the setting out of the four sides, which both of those are italicized. Queen Carrie, welcome. Awesome to see you. Wonderful. Therasia Byrne, Michael Sailors. Oh my gosh, first live ever. So cool. Welcome in. Happy Sunday and happy Monday. We got a new week coming. Sweet. Very good. All right. As we have seen, nothing is said of the way the enclosure might have been erected around the perch. The text does not give its name. The narrative contains some hints of its existence, but these are unusually obscure. And when we can expect the descriptions of physical work to start, the mythical scene comes to an end. The first enclosure that was made land was probably a mere fence fashioned from the reeds. This fence formed a courtyard open to the sky, at the rear of which was the perch as a mark of the most sacred part of the site. Naturally, such a primitive enclosure must have contained a symbol or symbols to indicate that the place was sacred, or to intimate who was the god who resided there. So it is intimate. Cool. At this point, we may recall the sacred symbols which the Sheptu were believed to have brought from the BWHNM. Wait, what is the BWHNM? Is that the Mansion of the God? No. Maybe it'll say it in a second. These symbols, in all probability, represented the earliest type of sacred objects that might have been kept in the primitive enclosures. BWHNM. It's like a key, you know? Language. It's so cool. They included also the image of an ancestor god. We cannot cite archaeological evidence to confirm that this type of emblem was really the earliest symbol used in pre-dynastic cultist places of the falcon. We do not know to what real objects they may correspond. Nothing more is said about the IHT, or substances, for which, as we know, the crew of the falcon was responsible in the payland. They might have been kept within the newly erected enclosure, but the text does not mention that. Eventually, a shelter or any other light construction was made above them. Light construction. I've spent time thinking about that since that dawned on, like, because I think she's talking about the weight of something, that it's lightweight, but what if she's not? What if it's like made from like the light, like photons, and or maybe both. Interesting. Yeah, I was thinking too, man. Wouldn't it be cool to talk to this lady? I wonder where she is in the world. Or is she still alive? Okay. They might have been kept within the newly erected enclosure, but the text does not mention that. Oh, wait, I said that. Oh, I'll continue from there. Maybe. So they might have been kept within the newly erected enclosure, but the text does not eventually a shelter or any other light construction was made above them. The lack of information on this subject appears at first surprising, especially if we recall the situation on the edges of the payland before the land for the new foundation was created. But the presumed absence of the creative matter prompts a suggestion. There is no allusion to them since, or there is no allusion, how do I? There is no allusion to them since the moment when the first enclosure was erected. It may be surmised that these IHT or substances were believed to have been infused into the structure of the first enclosure. The first important fact that can be deduced from the Edfu account is that the earliest enclosure of the falcon is said to have been founded on the water's edge. This appears to be also a custom of the early ages, for we can add further textual evidence indicating the riverbank as the foundation ground of sacred domains. To show that the Edfu evidence reveals the aspect of a genuine sacred enclosure as it might once have existed, we may recall representations of enclosures of sacred animals and birds, which we find on objects from the Archaic period. They show close similarity with what is known from the Edfu texts. In view of these points of contact in the essential features of construction, we suggest that in both we have the same traditions and the same conception of the appearance of an early sacred place. At Edfu, there is preserved the memory of a genuine enclosure of sacred birds. We also find at Edfu 2 instances of reliefs that depict the appearance of the early cultist place of the falcon. These 2 representations might have been inspired by the contents of the cosmogonical records and can only be regarded as a pictorial expression of the thought contained in the record. Their resemblance to the original drawings on the archaic objects, however, is striking. Ooh, I wish this was a picture book too. We see in the relief a thicket of reeds representing the primeval perch. The falcon is seated on it, and on the right and left of the seat, there stand the creators of the perch in a position of adoration. I just got a flash, and sometimes I get this flash while I'm reading this book. The Never Ending Story, those 2 like sentinels standing there that the main character has to like walk through. I don't know. I just thought I'd share. All right, let's take a sip. This tastes like dessert drink. This dude at work, he gave me this really good blueberry tea, and it tastes so much like I used to get this really expensive blueberry tea from World Market. It's so good. Oh my gosh, it really does taste like I'm drinking just, oh my gosh, dessert. Plus I put honey in it, so it's sweet. Dude, that is delicious. World Market, dude, they have amazing teas and chocolate. They have chocolate from around the world. Oh my goodness. Can you guys still hear me? Dude, what is up with my camera? Son of a gun. It's like, can y'all still hear me? Okay, you can. Thank you. I do not know what is going on with my camera, dude. I have the hub running right now, and I am just, I can see myself loud and clear. I can see myself loud and clear on my hub, my camera hub over here. But dude, I mean, the text is the most important part anyways, to be able to hear me. Ton of a gun though, but like I already postponed my live like by a half an hour because I was figuring this out. I am stoked that that thing that I like installed into my hard drive, like a new like high-tech 3.0 USB port. Like I took my computer part and I did it with my own hands, but like what the? Okay, so I am in the hub. Now what? Oh my gosh. Elagato is like the link. It's the it looks like a flash drive, but it's what I actually stick my computer, or the link that goes to my Canon camera, which is like an EOS camera. I put it into that, and then it gives me so that I have like real time, because it's all like, what is it? It's just all really powerful equipment so that my computer can show time. Dude. Um I guess I'm just going to keep reading with this beautiful picture on here. I'll just take my stop camera. Okay. It's not loose. Yeah, I don't know what's up with that, but it is so annoying. Raw. Okay. I still have my finger on this place. So last sentence. Their resemblance to the original drawings on the archaic objects, however, is striking. We see in the relief a thicket of reeds representing the primeval perch. The falcon is seated on it, and on the right and left of the seat there stand the creators of the perch in a position of adoration. Beside this scene, there is the spear of the falcon, bearing the name SHM-HR, and believed to have emerged from Noon. It is the embodiment of the protector god. We can see the god of the temple in the scene, but no allusion is made to the protector god. His function seems to be limited to the time when the falcon lived only in the ancestral place of the original island. The myth refers to Heater Her and to the divine of heart as being present on the payland when the perch was erected. No evidence can be quoted to show that they were also present in the enclosure. The artificially made support of the god, the perch, could eventually be replaced by a tree. This is clear from the interpretation of the origin of the SBTY, or enclosure, of the place of the throne. A number of additional instances can be quoted from the Edfu texts, which show that the willow, indeed, was regarded as the original seat of the falcon. Wow. We can thus follow two traditions as far as the nature of the resting place of the falcon within the enclosure is concerned. The text says nothing about what might have happened between the erection of the oldest type of a sacred enclosure in the original payland and the final stage of the HWT-NTR, or Mansion of the God, the first temple of the falcon according to the Edfu tradition. No record is preserved elsewhere, which would enable us to reconstruct the subsequent phases of development. Nevertheless, our sources proceed to give a description of a temple, which is said to have been founded in Wetchesset in the region of Tannin, or rather, the reign of Tannin. This date, in spite of its abstract meaning, is of importance and shows that the Egyptians believed that the temple, as an entity, originated beyond the limits of historical time. We can see in this mythological date a further hint of the tradition concerning the continuity and relationship between the creation of the earth and the origin of the temple, at least as far as the foundation of the primitive temples is concerned. We have already pointed to the Egyptian belief that the time when the Paylands were created is described in the late sources as the reign of Tannin. Hence, the title of the Edfu record seems to indicate that the event described in our sources as the NHP, or fashioning, which refers to the foundation of the enclosure from which the temple evolved later on, was believed to have been included in the same era of the mythical age. This agrees also with a technical fact that the interpretation of the origin of the lands was, where other. This agrees also with the technical that the interpretation of the origin of the lands as well as that of the first temple was included in the same sacred book. It will follow that in the fifth Edfu cosmogonical record survives the memory of the final stage of development of the divine settlement which resulted from the command of the Ka. This is said to have happened in the place named Wetchesset Neder. We suspect that the name of Wetchesset Neder in this is the name of the place where the temple was believed to have been founded. Although the text does not say it, it is tempting to suggest that this Wetchesset Neter might be the payland of Wetchesset Neter. The first HWT NTR of the Falcon may thus be that of the payland, Wetchesset Neter. It originated in the reign of the Earth God and was founded on the land which the deceased Earth God determined in his bequest to the Falcon. Mr. Ahmed, tears from Amazon. Ooh, that sounds delicious. I think I will. Okay, cool. You know what? I'm going to try and, I see where I am here. I'm just going to try and unplug this real quick and plug it right back in and see if that does me any good. I got to climb under here real quick and use my flashlight. It's dark back there. Doop, boop, boop. Flashlight. Man, technology. It's cool. I don't think that'll do it, but we'll see what shakes. Oh, it did it! Okay, cool. Well, we'll see how long that lasts. Oh, son of a gun. Gotcha. Okay. Did you try turning it on and off again? Isn't that the first thing they say? Okay. There. See, it's more personal like this. Timo, awesome. Welcome in. Good to see you. Thank you. Okay. Some account aspect of the temple in Wetchesset Neter has already been given. The record speaks of an enclosure described by the term INB, of which the dimensions are in part lost, but which might well have been of 300 cubits from west to east and at least 400 cubits from north to south. Within this enclosure, there was a second enclosure of which the name is not given in the text. This second enclosure included a number of halls and rooms that eventually composed the first HWT-NTR, or Mansion of the God. The second enclosure was was erected at a distance of 105 cubits on each side of the outer enclosing wall. Within the interior of the inner enclosure was a small chamber of 30 by 20 cubits, which was, as has been mentioned, the HWT-KNI of the temple. This chamber was erected at the rear of the north wall of the inner enclosure. The exact dimensions of the inner enclosure are unknown. It was 90 cubits from east to west because its east and west walls were each of them 105 cubits from the outer enclosing wall. The exact north-south dimension is lost. Okay, so the exact north-south dimension is lost. At the south end of the inner enclosure were further sacred rooms. The text mentions a central hall named as the WSHT-HW of 50 by 45 cubits, flanked to east and west by smaller rooms of 30 by 30 cubits, described as a booth, and having to the south of it a small hall named the WSHT-SMS-IB and measuring 30 by 15 cubits. It seems that further buildings were included in the great enclosure, but the text of the following description has disappeared. In its final stage, therefore, the inner enclosure, representing the real temple, consisted of 4 rooms or halls at the south, and an open court of uncertain dimensions at the north end of which, and presumably on the axis, was a small chapel, the earliest building on the site. I wonder if one of these are pictured. See if I can't link that up with the pictures of. So with little 30 by 20 by the SH, which was like the booth. Primitive Temple of the Falcon. Oh my gosh, here it is. Is that what we're talking about? I think so. Okay, it's this one. So they're saying it's like that. Juicy. And you need a 10-year-old. Right? Yeah. No supplementary documents can be cited to fill the lacunae in this account. Lacunae. What's that mean? I've heard that word before. I knew how to say it. Lacunae. Definition. A missing portion in a book or manuscript. That's cool. Or a cavity or depression, especially a bone in anatomy, especially in bone. That's how I've heard it from anatomy. Okay, cool. I like that. That's awesome. You have that relationship with the kids next door. That's cool. We take care of each other. Dude, that is delicious. Cool. We got to even see a little picture with it. Okay. But where am I? 220, 220. Cool. At the bequest of the Falcon. No. Reign of Tannin. Oh, son of a gun. Lost Dimension. Earliest building on the site. Okay, no supplementary. I read that too. At the beginning of the description, emphasis is laid on the constructing, IR, of the outer enclosure wall, IN. Though obviously this term INB must apply to a mere fence of great dimensions, fashioned from reed and other light material, and not to a wall of bricks and stones. The description is brief and reads, quote, how to know the foundation ground of the enclosing wall to be made around beforehand, end quote. Apparently, the INB enclosure was laid out on the payland in order to protect the sacred area and to separate it from the world outside. It may perhaps be imagined that this wall or fence described as the INB was pictured as marking the limits of the payland itself, but there seems to be no reason why it should do so. And if the ground of the enclosure and the payland were the same, the latter would be very small and there would be no room for anything but sacred buildings. On the other hand, it may be thought that the outer enclosure was set up in a more or less arbitrary manner along the convenient line. It should be pointed out that in the myth about the Temple of the Falcon, no special meaning seems to be connected with the foundation of the INB enclosure. This point seems to have been of no importance to the Egyptians, and speculation is vain. It is completely unknown whether the area embraced by the outer enclosure corresponds to any concrete entity, for the record is silent on this point. We know only that this enclosure extended from south to north. The term INB is new in this tradition, unknown to the previous descriptions of the erection of the fence around the perch, where we come across terms such as SBHT, HWT, and SBTY. As none of these terms occur in the description of the temple, it is highly probable that there might be an influence of another tradition, perhaps even of a later date. We are inclined to suggest that this description might refer to a somewhat later stage of the primeval age of gods than the end of the accounts of the second Edfu record. There might have been a long period of time between the type of sacred enclosures fashioned on the Paylands first and the stage of which the Edfu record gives an interesting account. That in the for the building of the temple, the INB enclosure is said to be made in the first place before any other sacred buildings had been erected on the site, seems to indicate an order of constructing different from what is known from the situation in the Payland. The preserved description of the organization of the temple in Wetchesatneter must therefore refer to a much later stage in the development of the primitive temples, if not even to the final stage of their growth and history. It clearly shows an order of construction which is unlike what is known about the order which prevailed in the Paylands. The following part of the record is very damaged, and there is no other relevant source which might help to sketch the subsequent development of the buildings eventually constructed within the area delimited by the outer enclosure. What appears, however, to be quite certain is that in the encircling outer enclosure, there was erected yet another enclosure. The distance between the walls of these two enclosures was 150 cubits on both sides, on the west as well as on the east side. The preserved part of the text does not give the name and the dimensions of the second enclosure in which the temple eventually evolved. Thus it appears that at a definite moment there were two enclosures fashioned from light materials, like reeds, which formed the early mansion of the god. The text then proceeds to give the specification of the ground plan, or SNTT, of the interior of the second enclosure. It is of importance that in this connection the term HWT-NTR is not used. The text seems to give the impression that, at that stage, a distinction was made only between the enclosing wall and its interior. It will be noticed that in the first stage of construction, within the interior of the inner enclosure, a sanctuary described as SH or booth is said to be erected, and that the perch, DB squiggly, is not mentioned at all as enshrined within the inner part of the enclosure. Since the perch was definitely in existence, it is legitimate to theorize and to suggest that this booth originated in a shelter primarily erected to protect the perch, and that, in fact, it became the first and most important part of the primitive temple. It is known that in the earliest stage of its history, the perch of the falcon stood in a courtyard open to the sky. It is natural that there was a need to shield the god's seat. Yet the form of the sign for SH, makes it evident that a simple light structure resting eventually on three pillars was erected above the perch. I don't know if this will come out, but it looks like a little M sort of. See where my finger is? Right there. Right there. This type of primitive shelter became the elementary form of the first sanctuary of the primitive temples, the SH sanctuary. The suggestion that the sanctuary in our record may represent the place in which the perch believed to stand in the original construction is supported by the stress laid on this sanctuary in the description. Since the sanctuary is mentioned in the first part of the description of the inner part of the enclosure, it was perhaps considered to be the most important part of the complex. At this point, too, the description may hint at a definite stage of the development. The text indicates that the sanctuary was erected at the north rear wall of the enclosure and in its middle. Although this sanctuary is given the name HWTKNI, it is described by the term SH, and it is this, perhaps, that hints at the original aspect of the inner enclosure which was made in the Wetchesatneter. Originally, the temple in the Wetchesatneter was probably a mere courtyard, having at its north wall very little more than a simple light structure of reed erected round the perch to screen and protect it with its lord and to screen and protect it with its lord and to mark the most sacred part within it. This booth might have been the starting point of the construction of the interior in the primitive temples. Excuse me. And it was from it. Oh, excuse me again. Let's try that sentence again. This booth might have been the starting point of the construction of the interior in the primitive temples, and it was from it that the holy of holies of the later temples eventually developed. Dude, I've been thinking on that. That's cool. Which always makes me think of that movie Year One with Jack Black. I love that movie so much. Oh, those lines are too good. He says, or the princess is saying to Jack Black, "I want to show you the holy of holies," and then he says something like, "Well, that's funny because I want you to sit on the poly of polies." It's so crude. Anyways, okay, I think I'm blushing. Nevertheless, it is legitimate to doubt whether the name HWTKNI was the original name of the first sanctuary that was ever constructed in the primeval temples of the Falcon. HWTKNI might be translated Mansion of Valor or Mansion of Throne. All the spellings known from the Edfu supports the former rendering, but the ideas inherent in the name Mansion of Valor, with its association with the fight between Horus and Seth, are foreign to our cosmogonical texts. There is no evidence in the description of the events occurring on the payland of Wetchesset Neder and that of Jeba, which would testify a connection between these paylands and a very early sanctuary of the Falcon bearing this name. Moreover, such a name does not occur among the names of the sacred places of the Falcon listed in our sources. It is known that Mansion of Valor is one of the names of the secondary sanctuary in the historical temple of Horus the Betatite at Edfu. Probably the priestly redactor of our text automatically gave the mythical sanctuary the name borne by the sanctuary he knew. We cannot cite an instance or refer to a tradition to which an early sanctuary or shrine consecrated to Horus would bear the name HWT-KNI. Certainly, our record is affected by later editing. Considering the name of the main sanctuary of this mansion, then the fact that the construction of the outer enclosure is mentioned in the first part of the account, we do not doubt that this record discloses views of a primitive temple which was constructed according to the pattern of a much earlier prototype. Nevertheless, it is inherently possible that this type of building, consisting of a courtyard with one single sanctuary in its northernmost part, represented a definite stage in the development of Egyptian temples in general, that this construction was repeated in several places, and that the aspect of the back central sanctuary might change according to local traditions. Later, an extension might have been made to this temple courtyard, and further buildings may have been constructed in its front part. This might have been the third phase in the development. This extension might have been made with a view to meeting the requirements of the service in the primitive temples, and this was perhaps what gave rise to a smaller courtyard in the front of the enclosure. Our documents indicate that off the south wall of the inner enclosure, a hall described as WSHT was added at a time which is not indicated. Nothing in the tradition can be linked with this front hall, nor do we know its function. The text alludes to an act described as HW. Tentatively, the interpretation to sanctify may be suggested, but there is no evidence to clarify the meaning of the episode HW in the service of the primitive sanctuaries. This WSHT hall has two has two side chambers described as the SH or sanctuaries. Then a smaller hall at its front, which might resemble the hypostyle hall of the later temples. But nothing more is said of their eventual significance, and moreover, the record is completely damaged in this part. We know nothing of what other extensions might have been made to this complex, or what other sacred buildings might eventually have been enshrined in the same enclosure. Two facts emerging from this account can be considered important. The temple appears to have developed in its building from north to south. Nowhere is there, in the preserved part of the text, mention of brick or stone being used as material for the construction of the mansion in Wetchesett Neder. The development of the temple in Wetchesett Neder appears to include four stages. In its primitive stage, the temple was a simple courtyard in the northern part of which was erected the resting place of the god who was adored there. This seat might eventually have been surrounded by protecting symbols and images of ancestor gods. In the second stage, a roof was made over the seat, and this gave rise to the first sanctuary within the enclosure, which is described in our text as the SH, or sanctuary. In the third stage, an extension was made at the south end in building a hall with a number of side chambers. It remains doubtful whether, at that stage, other chambers were built within the original enclosure along its sides. In the fourth stage, the structure was surrounded by yet another wall of much bigger dimensions. Lucky Stone, awesome, good to see you. Yasmin, welcome in. I'm glad to meet you in here in this live. Welcome in. Thank you. Thank you so much. 47. Okay, cool. Yeah, actually, let's take a sip and then I'll continue. Yum. It may be suggested that what is described in our record as the HNW, or the interior, acted as the original nucleus of the physically real temple, and that this original nucleus has preserved the genuine features of the primitive enclosure in which the god was first adored. We see here points of contact with the mythological narrative. What was believed to have resulted from natural needs in the BWHBBT, or the place of the primeval waters, formed the original nucleus of the normal type of the Egyptian temple. In the Edfu tradition, however, this was the genuine type of enclosure of the sacred falcon, and consequently, the fundamental unit of the earliest type of this temple. Having said this, we must point out that these words are in no sense intended to imply either that the prototype of such a temple was a temple of the falcon Horus, or that it ever actually existed at Edfu in prehistoric or archaic times. There is neither archaeological nor textual evidence to confirm that an archaic cultist place called Wetchesett Neder, or Wetchesett Hor, ever acted first sacred place consecrated to the falcon Horus in Upper Egypt. The fact that in the Edfu texts this temple is associated with the cult of the falcon Horus seems to be due to the later Edfu propaganda. It has been noticed that nowhere is there an allusion to the constitution of the cult of the falcon Horus in connection with this temple. We do not claim either that these records reveal the history of the early shrine primitive temples that might have been founded on the districts of Lower Egypt and in Lower Egyptian Jeba, or in the DMIT-N-HR, or the shore of the Western River. Wow. Tenacious D. All right. Love them. Although it is tempting to compare the mythological situation in the Edfu records with the geographical conditions of the falcon's cultist places to the north of Memphis, this problem is outside the scope of the present study. When we confront the archaeological account of the organization of the temple in Wetchesett Neder with the mythological narrative concerning the events in the Paylands, it appears that the Edfu records present the view that a temple of this structural development was believed to have been founded as the renewal of the home of the Ka. This type of temple in fact the sole one which the Edfu tradition derives from the creation of the earth. Consequently, it is the first mythical temple that was consecrated to the falcon. As far as the myth is concerned, such a as far as the myth is concerned, such a temple might have been believed to have existed on any payland which was sacred to the falcon. We may surmise that on all the paylands which we find listed in our documents, the same type of sacred building was believed to have been erected, and that in all these paylands the development of the sacred place proceeded in the same manner from the simplest type of place of worship to the complete mansion of the god. Therefore, the type of sacred building described in the tradition as the temple in Wetchesett was regarded as the structure specific to the original paylands. The history of this temple will then illustrate the characteristics which might have been common to all the early temples. If we agree that in the account concerning the original paylands is recorded in if we agree that in the account concerning the original paylands is recorded the history of the development of an early religious center, and that these paylands represent the earliest cultist places of Egypt, it will follow that this type of temple was the oldest type of the Egyptian temple in general. This would show that there was a unique type of temple and a unique plan of organization according to which all the sacred enclosures and temples were constructed during one of the prehistoric ages. We may perhaps see here a point of contact with the fact that the Edfu record does not indicate who was, in fact, the lord of the temple in Wetchesett for whom this temple was primarily founded. We cannot state dogmatically that this was only the falcon, for an early temple of an appearance such as is described in our records could, of course, be constructed to apply to almost any god. If we agree that a mere general significance is intended, this may explain why the perch is not mentioned in the description. Nevertheless, from the point of view of the myth, this temple was created for the successor of the creator, the Winged One. It is tempting to assume that this temple was primarily consecrated to the cult of the Winged One. We know, on the other hand, that later on the falcon was equated with the Winged One. Consequently, he was regarded, at least in some parts of Egypt, as the first divine occupier of the temple of Wetchesett, and this tradition was adopted later on by the Edfu temple. Although the Edfu sources have preserved a detailed account of all that had happened before the temple was founded, here, on the contrary, the description is very brief and it is concerned with the bare physical appearance of the temple. There is no extensive account of the successive phases of development which can easily be discerned in the final stage of the history of the temple. No interpretation of various mythological events which might accompany the growth of the temple and might help to explain their abstract significance. The narrative does not allude to the creative powers who fashioned the first temple. This point appears surprising. It may be thought that this part of the original narrative was omitted in the Edfu editing, and that the original version contained a detailed description of the work completed by the progeny of the earth god in fashioning the temple for the successor of the creator. Do you see? Moreover, no indication is given at all of the ceremonies which were connected with such an early Nothing is said in the fifth record of the foundation rites, nor is there a picture of the consecration ceremony which must have existed at a remote date, since evidence is given of its elementary aspect in connection with the creation of the earliest type of the enclosure of the falcon. The text reveals nothing of the ritual service which was celebrated in such an early temple, and what was the use of the sacred chambers named in the Edfu record. This lack of information might be a hint of a very old tradition of the temple in Wetchesett in which the ritual service comprised simple episodes of adoration and presenting offerings. This accords with the fact that the Edfu record does not reveal the name of the deity to whom this temple was primarily consecrated. It is therefore logical at this stage of our study to inquire whether the temple said to be that of the falcon in the Wetchesett was solely a myth, and a product of speculation, or whether the Edfu accounts have preserved the memory of a temple that had once really existed in the dim past of pre-dynastic Egypt. It must be admitted that there is no scrap of archaeological evidence that such a temple ever existed at Edfu, nor have remains of such a primitive shrine as yet been found elsewhere in Egypt. With the exception of the isolated pieces of evidence which we duly quoted in the course of this study, there are no data to confirm our deductions and to illustrate in a connected way the development of the temple. As against this, the account of the appearance of the temple and of its eventual expansion is clear and specific, and certainly built on real facts. The temple developed in a way that seems logical and natural, and detailed dimensions are given, though it must be borne in mind that in myths, dimensions are among the least reliable data. We indicate to the opinion, or rather, we incline to the opinion that experiences of a far distant past lie at the heart of the Edfu myth of creation. It has been noticed that the description indicates 4 succeeding stages of development, and that, consequently, there must have been a long period of time between the elementary structure, the later original nucleus, and the complete mansions of the god, or mansion singular, mansion of the god. Thus, if we take the earliest and simplest unit in this temple, the sanctuary, HWT-KNI, or Mansion of Valor, and its enclosure, there is a distinct resemblance to the drawings of sacred buildings on the objects of archaic period, a resemblance that even extends to the placing of the main sanctuary apparently at the end of the reed enclosure and against the wall, a fact to which we have already pointed in our analysis. The Edfu evidence is probably based, in part at least, on facts, and it may well describe a primitive temple which is now completely lost, but which once existed in Egypt. It is inherently possible that a structure such as the temple in Wetchesset Neder was constructed and reconstructed in many places of pre-dynastic Egypt, and perhaps it is only the memory of the stage of its appearance that survives in the Edfu records. This view appears admissible if we recall the way in which the title of the record is written. This makes it clear that there was a temple constructed in the far distant past, and that another was made on exactly the same pattern, but still during the period regarded as the mythical age of the gods. Strictly speaking, the Edfu record appears as the summary of a long development of a temple, beginning with the first temple, the existence of which remained only in the memory. Again, it will be noticed that the text never mentions materials such as bricks and stone in connection with this temple, but always refers to light materials such as reeds, which must surely have been the materials of the earliest structures. The fifth Edfu record was preserved, a part of the history of an Egyptian temple as it existed in a definite region and in a definite period. This, in our opinion, can hardly be much later than the late pre-dynastic period, though possibly it may extend into archaic period. If this be so, it would indicate that, though the great funerary monuments of the early dynastic period were built from brick, the temples might still have been constructed from light materials, and was the custom of somewhat earlier times. Man, isn't it fascinating to think about all the years that have passed and all the generations, and like the way things are right now, this whole, paradigm that we live in, and our countries and things like that, like back in the day, and they find all of the satellite mapping of structures in like South America, and then like all over the world of, you know, civilizations that came and went that we don't even know anything about. We don't know anything about them. And think about how many families and generations lived in those places, and the thoughts that they had, and how they lived, what was important to them, and what did they strive for. And juicy. And here we are in the moment. Wow. In support of the theory that the Edfu account has disclosed traditions of a very ancient site, it is of interest to draw attention once more to concerning the DD pillar. It is known that the sacred places in which the pillar was regarded as a sacred object were the earliest cultist places that ever existed in Egypt. We have clear evidence that the origin of the temple in Wetchesat-Neter was determined by a pre-existing sacred place which had as its center the DD pillar. There is, of course, the problematic question of where the tradition concerning the early temple in Wetchesat-Neter had its home. The allusion to the time described as the reign of Tannin points naturally to a site in the Memphite region, or at least in Lower Egypt. Further support for this hypothesis may be seen in a fact derived from Edfu. We find that in the relief representing a scene of adoration in the primitive Wetchesat-Neter, the king, as an officiant who was believed to enter freely into the Wetchesat-Neter to adore its lord, bears the title of D-R. This title, as is well known, appears in the texts of the Old Kingdom associated with the royal functionaries of Lower Egypt. We suspect that this scene of worship in an early sanctuary, as it is depicted on the wall of the Edfu temple, may preserve the memory of a Memphite or Lower Egyptian tradition. It cannot, however, be proved that this D-MR represented institutions of pre-dynastic Egypt, the chief priest appointed to the early sacred places of the falcon. Nevertheless, the strongly pronounced Memphite tone in which the Edfu records are written cannot be denied. Ooh, that's a cool sentence. It is highly probable that these records have preserved Memphite traditions concerning the origin of sacred places and the temples which were founded on later date, or which were founded there later on. I don't know why I said that. That these traditions and beliefs are most probably of Lower Egyptian origin can be confirmed by the fact that nowhere in the whole narrative is there a single hint of a distinct connection with Upper Egypt. It is the Edfu tradition solely that used this myth for explaining the origin of the temple of their local god, the falcon Horus. It associated its local cult with a tradition of much earlier date, which was probably foreign to Upper Egypt. Consequently, the temple of the falcon Horus in Upper Egypt is the first house of the god that came into existence on land that emerged from the primeval waters close to the actual spot on which the creation of the world commenced. On the mythical plane, the building of the first house of the falcon was undertaken at the command of a defunct deity and was fulfilled during the period when the earth god ruled. This mythical temple resembled, in many respects, the primitive sacred enclosures that once existed in Egypt, not later than the First Dynasty. The Edfu tradition, and so, perhaps, the tradition of many other temples, evidently looked on this far distant temple as a work of the gods themselves in which the creation of the earth was completed. This temple was undoubtedly regarded as the starting point in the development of the actual historical temple. Boom! We did it! And all I'm going to read tonight. I don't have to hard charge to this book anymore since I have a full another month with it. So I'm just going to keep to like closer 1 hour readings, right? But we're getting there, man. We're like 3/4 of the way through this book. It's juicy. But I know tomorrow I will be going live. That's my intention anyhow, to go live tomorrow. And but not with this book. Tomorrow I'm going to go live with The Path of Alchemy. Yeah, so I have a little bit of home to yet finish. I haven't pulled up those articles yet. But everyone, thanks for hanging out with me tonight. Welcome everybody that came for a new live. That's so cool and fun. And yeah, let's have wonderful Mondays. Let's just like intend it, feel it, and then wake refreshed and do it to it. Yeah. So dang, I'm sending you tremendous good vibes. I thank you, YouTube. I thank you, StreamYard. I thank you, my family. I thank you, all my friends here. I thank you, everyone. I thank you, God. And man, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Mwah. Take care of yourselves. And